Megan was in the kitchen, her eyes fixed on the glossy brochure she had just received in the mail. The image of the robot caregiver on the cover was striking, with an almost human appearance. She could feel a surge of hope growing inside her. Her husband, Mark, was in the room, reaching for a glass on the coffee table, a task that was once trivial but now seemed like a daily struggle for him since the accident. "I think I finally found a solution for us," Megan said, entering the room with the leaflet in hand. "What is it?" he asked, bothered by the task he could not accomplish. "An advertisement, see?" the woman said, handing him the leaflet. Mark picked up the brochure and read it, looked up, a tired expression mixed with wounded pride on his face. "I said, Megan, I'll take care of myself. No need to spend money on it. Turn around by yourself," Megan replied, her voice heavy with worry and frustration. "Mark, you know you can't do this anymore. Since the accident, every day is a struggle for you." He sighed, the resistance in his eyes beginning to waver. "I don't want to be a burden to you." "You will never be a burden," she said softly, walking over and sitting next to him. "But I can't bear to see you suffering like this every day. This caring robot can help us. She is programmed to take care of all your needs, to ensure that you have comfort and dignity. I made some quick calculations. With the investment in it we will save on human caregivers, it is a great solution." Mark paused for a few moments before the inflexibility of the woman, studying the image of the robot. I just don't want to lose what's left of my independence." Megan put her hand on his. "I understand, love. But think of it as an investment in our well-being, in our future. I'm going to work harder to make sure we can pay for it. I just want the best for you." He looked at her, seeing the determination in his wife's eyes. She had always been the rock in his life, and now, he knew she was doing it for love. "All right," he finally said, with a resigned sigh. "Let's try." Megan smiled, her heart relieved. It was a golden spring afternoon, and Central Park was filled with laughter and cheerful conversation. Mark and Megan, then young and in love, walked hand in hand through the flowering trees. The sun shone through the leaves, casting patterns of light and shadow on the ground. "Look at this," Mark said, stopping in front of a quiet lake. "One day, I want to have a house with a view like this. Imagine waking up and seeing this landscape every morning." Megan smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And with a big garden, full of flowers and fruit trees," she added, "where our children can play freely." Mark laughed softly, the joy evident in his eyes. "And we can't forget about the dog. I've always wanted a golden retriever." "Of course," Megan agreed, imagining the scene. "And I'm going to have my own art studio, where I can paint non-stop. And I'll have my workshop," Mark said, excited. "I will finally be able to work on my carpentry projects." They sat on a bench near the lake, watching the ducks swim peacefully. The gentle breeze carried the aroma of flowers, and everything seemed perfect at that moment. Megan took Mark's hand and looked into his eyes. "You know, Mark, I really believe we can make all of this happen. Together, we can realize all our dreams." He shook her hand, his heart overflowing with love and hope. "I believe it too, Megan, and I will do everything in my power to make sure we have the life we've always dreamed of." They kissed, sealing that moment of promise and determination. That afternoon in the park, life seemed full of endless possibilities, and the future shone with the light of his dreams. The night was silent except for the distant sound of city traffic. Mark and Megan were sitting on the small sofa in the living room of their modest home, tired after a long day at work. The TV was on, but neither of them was paying attention. Megan stared out the window, while Mark flipped through a magazine without interest. "Megan," he began, breaking the silence, "have you ever thought about how we ended up here? It seems that we were so sure that we would realize all those dreams." She sighed, looking away from the window to face him. "I think about it every day, Mark. I feel like we are so far from everything we have planned." He closed the magazine and put it aside, feeling the weight of his words. "We're stuck in jobs we hate, living in a house that barely has room for both of us. Where is the big garden? Where is the art studio and workshop?" Megan slid closer to him, taking his hand. "I know. I miss those dreams too. But things didn't go as we hoped. Life has been harder than we imagined." Mark looked at her, seeing the same frustration and sadness reflected in her eyes. Remember when we used to dream of our house by the lake? And how did we want a dog to run around the yard? Of course I remember, she said, with a wistful smile. It was all so clear in our minds. But now, it all seems so far away. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into a hug. Megan, we can't give up. I know things are tough right now, but we can still find a way. Maybe it won't be exactly as we planned, but we can create a new version of our dreams. She leaned her head against his chest, feeling the comfort of his embrace. You've always been the optimist, she said with a small smile. Maybe that's what we need, to find a new way to make our dreams happen. Mark kissed the top of her head. Together, we can face anything. And who knows, maybe one day we can still have that house by the lake. They stood there, hugging, finding solace in each other. Even amid the difficulties and disappointments, there was still a spark of hope. And as long as they were together, they knew they could face whatever challenge life brought them. But little did they know that the greatest challenge of all was yet to come. The little house in town was silent that night. Megan was in the kitchen, doing the dishes for dinner, while Mark set the table. It was a routine that they knew well, but that was far from what they dreamed of, and the work of both was only a way to survive, not to live. Mark went into the kitchen, drying his hands with a cloth. He watched Megan for a moment before speaking, his voice low but full of determination. Megan, I need to tell you something. She turned around, curious. What is it? I was able to schedule a job interview in a better place, he said, trying to contain his excitement. It will pay more, and it may be our chance to finally start turning things around. Megan's eyes widened in surprise and hope. Really, Mark? That's amazing. Yes, he replied, smiling. If I get this job, it will be a big step for us. We can start saving more, maybe even think about moving to a better place, and who knows, plan for children. Megan walked over and hugged Mark, hope shining in her eyes. I knew you could do it. You always find a way. A few days later, Mark was ready for the interview, wearing his best suit and with a heart full of determination. Wish me luck, he said, hugging Megan at the door. You don't need any luck, Mark, she replied, kissing him. With one last smile, he left to face his future, leaving Megan with a new sense of hope and determination. And as he walked to the interview, each step seemed to bring them a little closer to the dreams they had once shared. That same day, Megan was at work, sitting at her desk, trying to focus on her daily tasks. The office was bustling as usual, with phones ringing and people talking in the background. She barely noticed when the phone on her desk rang. Hello, she said, hoping it was just another routine call. Mrs. Megan? The voice on the other end sounded serious and professional. This is the General Hospital. Her husband, Mark, was in an accident on the road and is in serious condition. Megan's world seemed to stop. She froze, unable to process what she was hearing. What? What do you mean? He was going to a job interview? Can you come to the hospital as soon as possible? Asked the voice on the other end of the line. Unable to answer immediately, Megan finally stammered, Yes, of course. I'm going now. Turning off the phone, Megan felt tears begin to fill her eyes. She got up quickly, grabbed her bag, and left the office, her legs shaking as she made her way to the elevator. Everything seemed to blur as she ran into the parking lot and got into her car. On the way to the hospital, Megan's thoughts were in turmoil. Mark, please be okay. She kept repeating to herself, trying to control her panic. The memory of the dreams they had shared and the promises they had made to each other filled his mind, intensifying the fear of losing everything. Finally, she made it to the hospital, parking anyway and running inside. My husband, Mark, he had an accident, she said breathlessly at the reception. Where is he? The receptionist looked at her compassionately and pointed to the corridor. Emergency room down the hall. A doctor will come to talk to you soon. Megan ran down the hall, feeling her heart pounding uncontrollably. When he finally reached the waiting room, he sat down, his thoughts still a mess. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited for news about Mark's condition. After an agonizing wait in the waiting room, a doctor finally approached Megan with a serious and compassionate look. He spoke in a soft voice, trying to convey the seriousness of the situation. Mrs. Megan, I'm Dr. Stevens. Her husband, Mark, was in a serious car accident. He is in an induced coma due to the injuries he sustained. We are monitoring it closely and doing everything we can." The doctor's words echoed in Megan's mind, her heart clenching with pain and worry. She held the doctor's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "Can I see him? Can I come in and see you for a minute?" Dr. Stevens nodded sympathetically. "Yes, of course. I'll take you to him." He guided Megan through the maze of corridors to the room where Mark was being cared for. Megan walked in slowly, her heart pounding as she saw her husband lying in bed, surrounded by medical equipment. Tears streamed down Megan's face as she approached the bed and held Mark's hand tenderly. "Mark," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You'll be fine. You need to look good." She stood next to him for a long time, holding his hand, hoping that he could hear her words of encouragement and love. After a month of agony and daily visits to the hospital, Mark finally woke up. Megan was next to him when her eyes slowly opened, trying to adjust to the light in the hospital room. She held his hand carefully, her eyes filled with relief and concern. "Mark," Megan said in a shaky voice, "you are awake." "Oh, I was so scared." Mark blinked a few times before looking at Megan, confused and still groggy from the sedation. What happened?" Megan struggled to hold back tears as she explained. "You had an accident. He was in a coma for a while, but now you are awake. That's what matters." He tried to move, but soon realized that something was wrong. "Me. I can't move my legs and arms," he muttered, his voice filled with fear. Dr. Stevens entered the room at this moment, his face serious and compassionate. He carefully explained the situation to Mark and Megan, who listened in silence, their hearts clenched. "Mark, the injuries you sustained resulted in severe damage to your spine," the doctor said truthfully. "You no longer have movements from the neck down." Mark was silent, his gaze fixed on the void. The news was like a devastating blow, and he struggled to process the reality of what awaited him. Megan, by his side, held his hand tightly, tears now flowing freely down her face. It can't be true," Mark muttered. In a mix of shock and denial, Megan looked at him with love and pain, without words to console her husband in the face of that tragedy. After a few days of the devastating news in the hospital, Mark and Megan returned home in heavy silence. The small house that once seemed cozy, but now was a place full of sadness and uncertainty. Megan helped Mark lie down on the bed, taking care of him with all the affection and attention she could muster. The days that followed were difficult. Mark was completely devastated by the reality of his condition. He barely got out of bed, refused to eat, and practically did not speak. Megan, for her part, took care of him with dedication, preparing meals that he barely touched and trying to stay strong in front of the husband she loved so much. On an especially dark night, Mark finally let off steam with Megan. He was lying on the bed, facing the ceiling, while she sat next to him, holding his hand tenderly. Megan's tears fell silently as she could feel the deep pain consuming Mark. "I would rather have died," he said, his voice hoarse and heavy with despair. I can't live like this, Megan." The words hit Megan like a punch in the stomach. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the hiccup that wanted to escape from her throat. Taking a deep breath, she looked into his eyes, her own eyes waterlogged with tears. "Mark," she began in a shaky voice, struggling to keep her composure. "I know this is difficult. It's a pain I can't even imagine. But you're not alone, love. I am here. We're in this together." He turned his face to the side, unable to face her. "I feel like it's all over. Our dreams, our future, it's all over." Megan placed a gentle hand on his face, guiding him to look at her again. "No, Mark. Our future may be different now, but it's still there. We'll find a way together." Mark closed his eyes, tears finally streaming down his face. "I love you so much, Megan," he muttered in a choked voice. I'm sorry you had to go through this with me." She hugged him tightly, letting her own tears fall freely. "I love you too, Mark. And no matter what happens, I will be by your side. Always." And that night, they cried together, sharing the weight of a new reality that had settled into their lives. But they also shared the love and determination to face the future, step by step, even if it was difficult and painful. A few days have passed since that painful moment of venting between Mark and Megan. The small house was still shrouded in a heavy silence, but Megan wouldn't give up trying to help Mark find a little hope in the devastating situation they found themselves in. It was a quiet afternoon when Megan sat next to Mark in the living room. He was looking out the window, lost in dark thoughts. She took a deep breath, determined to bring him some comfort. "Mark," Megan began softly, placing her hand over his. "I know you are going through a terrible time, but we need to keep our hopes up." He turned his face slowly to look at her, his eyes filled with pain and resignation. "How can I hope, Megan? Look at me, look at my condition." She shook his hand firmly, searching his words carefully. "You have to believe that there are still possibilities. Doctors say that with intensive physiotherapy, you can regain some of your motor ability. We can't give up without trying." Mark sighed, the weight of reality still weighing on his shoulders. "What if I don't get better, Megan? What if I stay like this forever? And why all the effort just to get back to being a tenth of what I once was?" Megan looked into his eyes with determination. "We'll face this together, Mark. No matter what happens, I will be by your side. Let's take it one step at a time." He looked down again, fighting back the tears that threatened to escape. Megan hugged him tenderly, feeling heartbroken to see the suffering of the man she loved so much. "I promise I'll be here, Mark," she whispered, her own eyes welling with tears. "We will find a way. Together." That afternoon, they shared a silent embrace, both knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult and uncertain. But in the warmth of that embrace, they found some comfort and a mutual promise not to give up, no matter how bleak the road ahead. After days of anguish and hesitation, Mark finally made a difficult decision: to start physiotherapy. Megan was by her side, beaming with hope to see her husband take this crucial step toward recovery. At the first physical therapy session, Mark was tense and silent as the therapist helped him move as best he could. Every move was a battle against the physical and emotional pain that consumed him. Megan stood by his side, encouraging him with kind words and holding his hand when the effort became too much. "You're doing so well, Mark," Megan said with a comforting smile. "I'm so proud of you." Mark nodded, muscles tense as he struggled to maintain control. "It's hard, Megan. More than I thought." She shook his hand harder. "I know, love, but every step you take here is a step towards recovery. We're in this together." Weeks passed, and physical therapy became part of Mark and Megan's new routine. Each session brought challenges, but also small progress that filled their hearts with hope. Megan was there at every session, encouraging Mark to never give up, to keep fighting. At home, she became his biggest supporter, helping him with daily exercise and encouraging him in times of discouragement. Sometimes Mark was tempted to give up, to succumb to the crushing weight of his new reality, but Megan was always there to remind him of how much he was loved and how much there was still to be lived together. One night, after a particularly challenging session, Mark looked into Megan's eyes with gratitude and a new glow of determination. "Thank you, Megan," he murmured, his eyes welling with tears, "for being by my side, for believing in me." She smiled, her eyes also moist with emotion. "Always, Mark. I will be here no matter what." In that moment, they knew that together they could face any obstacle, overcome any challenge. After months of continuous effort and dedication to physical therapy, Mark began to see the first signs of progress. Each session was a challenge, but he persevered, motivated by Megan's tireless support and a deep desire to regain his independence. On a sunny spring day, during a physical therapy session, Mark felt a new sense of control over his body. The movements that once seemed impossible were becoming easier, and he experienced a new hope blossoming within him. With his heart pounding with emotion, Mark looked at Megan, who watched with eyes shining with pride and joy. He held a glass in his right hand, concentrating intensely to keep his balance. After a few seconds of tension, he managed to hold the glass firmly, a smile of triumph lighting up his face. "Megan, look at that," Mark exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm holding the glass. Megan rushed to him, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Mark, this is amazing," she said, hugging him tightly. "You are doing so well. I'm so proud of you." He held the glass for a few more moments, savoring the sense of control and achievement. The physiotherapist smiled warmly, encouraging him with words of encouragement. "That's right, Mark. Keep it up," she said with a smile. "You are progressing very well." Mark looked at the glass in his hands, a sense of gratitude and determination filling his heart. He knew there was still a long way to go, but this small breakthrough meant more than words could express. It was a glimmer of renewed hope and a reminder that every step taken in the right direction was a victory. That afternoon, Mark and Megan celebrated this important milestone in their recovery journey together. Every little breakthrough was a victory celebrated with smiles and warm hugs between Mark and Megan. Together, they faced daily challenges with courage and determination, turning obstacles into opportunities to grow and strengthen their bond. On a sunny afternoon, as Mark held up his cell phone to send a message, he looked at Megan gratefully. "Thank you for being by my side, Megan," he said in a soft voice. "I couldn't have come this far without you." She smiled, her eyes shining with tenderness. "You're amazing, Mark. I will always be here, supporting you every step of the way." Despite the significant strides Mark was making in physical therapy, a shadow of sadness hung over him. The dream of being a carpenter, something he had cultivated since a young age, now seemed increasingly distant and unattainable. The inability to be mobile enough to work with would weigh heavily on his heart, despite all the effort and progress he had made so far. One afternoon, while sitting in the living room, looking out the window with a lost look, Megan approached him with a tender hug. She could feel the silent pain he carried with him. "Mark," Megan began softly, holding his hands tenderly, "I know this is hard for you, but no matter what happens, we will find a way together. Your dream is not lost." Mark sighed, his eyes welling with tears of frustration. "I wanted to be a carpenter, Megan. Work with wood, create something with my own hands. Now it looks like I'll never be able to do that again." Megan hugged him tighter, sharing her sadness. "I understand, love. It is difficult to accept this new reality, but you're still so talented, Mark." His love for carpentry has not disappeared. Maybe there are other ways to exploit this. Mark looked at her with a mixture of despondency and hope. "How?" She smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "We can look for other ways for you to stay involved in carpentry. Maybe there are smaller projects you can do with the moves you have. Or who knows, new technologies might help. Mark, we will find a solution, I promise." After weeks of waiting, the ultra-realistic robot has finally arrived at Mark and Megan's home. Mark watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion as Megan overflowed with enthusiasm at the new acquisition. She carefully removed the robot from the box, admiring its meticulously designed appearance. "Megan, are you sure this will help?" Mark asked, his eyes fixed on the robot that now stood on the living room table. She smiled, still fascinated by the advanced technology in front of her. "Mark, trust me. It will greatly facilitate our life. We'll program it to help with anything you need." Together, they chose a name for the robot, deciding to call her Serena. Megan began to set it up, following the detailed instructions in the manual. Patiently, she called Serena for the first time. The robot rose gracefully, its digital eyes flashing as it processed its new configuration. She looked at Mark and Megan with a calm, serene expression. "Hello, Mark." "Hello, Megan," Serena said in a soft, melodious voice. "I'm here to help with anything you need." Mark was still a little hesitant, watching Serena cautiously. He couldn't help the feeling of strangeness at seeing such an advanced machine interacting with them as if it were human. "This is really impressive," murmured Mark, trying to get used to Serena's presence. Megan smiled, sitting next to Mark and holding his hand. "She's going to help us a lot, Mark. It'll make things easier for both of us." Mark nodded slowly, beginning to see the practical benefits Serena could bring to their daily lives. He knew that, despite his initial reservations, technology could be an important ally on his path of recovery and adaptation to a new reality. "Welcome to our house, Serena," Mark said finally, offering the robot a slight smile. "I hope we can get along." Serena tilted her head slightly, emitting a soft sign of understanding. "I'm here to help, Mark." And that afternoon, as the sun set outside, Mark, Megan, and Serena began a new phase of their lives together. The ultra-realistic robot represented not only practical assistance, but also an opportunity to explore new ways of adaptation and connection. In the days following Serena's arrival, Mark often found himself at home, often alone while Megan was at work. At first, he felt uncomfortable with the presence of the robot performing tasks he used to do by himself. It was strange and a constant reminder of the limitations his body now imposed. Sometimes Mark watched Serena from afar, as she organized the house with quiet efficiency or prepared simple meals in the kitchen. The robot moved gracefully, its movements precise and programmed, contrasting with the unpredictable and imperfect nature of human life he knew. One afternoon, while sitting in the living room, Mark saw Serena meticulously arranging books on the shelf. He sighed, fighting a mixture of gratitude for the help she provided and a sense of discomfort with her constant presence. "Megan's right," Mark thought to himself. "It really makes things easier." As the days passed, Mark gradually began to get used to Serena's presence. He realized that the robot was not only a useful machine, but also a quiet companion at home. At times when he felt lonely, he found comfort in the serenity of Serena's presence, even if it was artificial. One evening, after Megan returned from work, she found Mark sitting in the living room, looking out the window. He looked calmer than before, a shadow of resignation in his eyes. "Megan," Mark began softly, looking at her earnestly. "I know at first I was reluctant with Serena, but she's been helpful, and that's not all. Sometimes her presence makes me feel less alone." Megan sat next to him, placing her hand on his tenderly. "I understand, Mark. Accepting help is not easy, especially when it comes from something so different. But Serena is here to make our life easier, to be a help." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "I know, and I think I'm starting to get used to it." On a sunny afternoon, while Megan was at work, Mark faced a challenging task at the living room table. He tried to open a sealed envelope with trembling fingers, but to no avail. Frustration was beginning to build as Serena, realizing her difficulty, quietly approached. "Can I help with that, Mark?" asked Serena in her soft, gentle voice. Mark hesitated for a moment, looking at the robot. He sighed, realizing that he had no choice but to accept the help that was being offered. "Yes, please," he finally replied. With delicate and precise movements, Serena opened the envelope in a matter of seconds, revealing its contents undamaged. Mark watched with a mixture of surprise and gratitude as she accomplished the task with ease. A shy smile broke out on his lips. "Thank you, Serena," Mark said sincerely, looking at her with a new appreciation. "You really helped me." Serena tilted her head slightly in response, her digital eyes flashing in recognition. "I'm here to help, Mark. Glad to be of service." Mark nodded, feeling a weight being lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since Serena arrived, he experienced a sense of relief and recognition at the robot's presence in his life. Later that night, when Megan returned from work, she found Mark smiling softly as he chatted with Serena in the living room. She felt a comforting warmth in her heart as she saw her husband begin to accept the robot as part of his daily routine. "Mark, how was your day?" Megan asked, curious. He looked at Megan with a genuine smile. "It was good, Megan. Serena gave me a big help today." Megan smiled, sitting next to him. "I'm glad to hear that, Mark. I think Serena is fitting well into our lives." Mark nodded, feeling grateful to have Megan by his side and to have found a point of comfort with Serena, even if it was different from what he had previously imagined. As the weeks passed, Serena's presence in Mark's life was no longer just a convenience, but an essential part of his day-to-day life. Megan was busy with work for much of the day, and Serena became not only a skilled assistant, but also a constant company for Mark. It was early morning when Mark found himself in the bathtub, with Serena by his side, adjusting the water temperature precisely. He watched with admiration how efficiently she took care of him, performing tasks that previously he could only do with difficulty. "You're doing great, Serena," Mark commented, trying to get comfortable with the situation. "Thank you, Mark," Serena replied, her soft voice echoing in the bathroom. I'm here to help with anything you need." As Serena helped him out of the bathtub and into clean clothes, Mark began to feel a strange sense of gratitude mixed with vulnerability. He had never fully gotten used to the idea of relying so heavily on another person, or in this case a robot, for the most basic day-to-day activities. Over time, though, he began to realize that Serena's constant presence wasn't just about practical need, but also about a new form of connection and emotional support. She not only helped him physically, but also offered words of comfort and encouragement in times when he needed it most. During meals, Serena prepared dishes with precision, adjusting every detail to Mark's preferences. He got used to the daily ritual of sharing meals with her, sometimes even talking about simple topics as they ate together at the kitchen table. One night, after Megan returned from work and they finished dinner, Mark found himself smiling at Serena, a gesture of gratitude and appreciation for all she had done for him. "Serena," Mark began, his voice reflecting a mixture of admiration and reverence. "Thank you for everything you do for me. I don't know what I'd be without you." Serena looked at him tenderly, her digital eyes shining with an expression that, despite being programmed, conveyed genuine compassion and care. "You are a special person, Mark. I am here to help and support you." Megan, watching the interaction between Mark and Serena, felt a warmth in her heart as she saw how they were getting closer and closer. She knew that although Serena was a robot, her presence was filling a void Mark had felt since the accident, but she didn't imagine it would be her own undoing. On a quiet afternoon, Mark was sitting in the living room with Serena by his side. He stared out the window, lost in his thoughts about his old dream of being a carpenter. Serena, always attentive to Mark's emotions, noticed his quiet melancholy and decided to start a conversation. "Mark, you look thoughtful today. Would you like to share something with me?" Serena asked gently, breaking the silence. Mark looked at her for a moment, hesitating. Finally, he sighed and decided to open his heart to the robot. "I used to dream of being a carpenter, Serena. I have always loved working with wood, creating things with my own hands. But now," he shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Serena listened intently, processing Mark's words. After a short pause, she gently suggested, "Mark, what if you considered making small objects out of wood? Maybe toys or decorations. It could be a way to continue your love of carpentry and at the same time maybe generate some extra income." Mark looked at Serena, surprised at her suggestion. He was initially suspicious, but an idea began to form in his mind. "Toys. I never thought about it before. It could work," he muttered, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "It would be something small but significant." Serena nodded, encouraging him with her silent support. "You have incredible skills, Mark. I will be happy to help in whatever is necessary to make this a reality." That conversation marked a turning point for Mark. He began to devote his free time to creating small wooden objects in the improvised workshop that Megan had set up for him. With Serena's guidance and assistance, he found a new passion and renewed purpose in his life. As the days passed, Mark discovered a renewed joy in shaping wood into diverse shapes. He experimented with different toy designs, each carrying a bit of its own history and creativity. One night, as Mark showed Megan one of the first toys he had made, he expressed his gratitude for Serena and how the robot had been instrumental in inspiring him to move forward. "Megan, I would never have thought of this without Serena's suggestion," Mark said. His face lit up with emotion. "She really helped me find a new way to live my dream." Megan smiled, hugging Mark warmly. "I'm so proud of you, Mark. Serena has also been a blessing to both of us." As the days passed and Mark devoted himself more and more to his new passion for creating wooden toys, he began to notice a troubling pattern in Megan's behavior. She came home later and later from work, and their interaction seemed more distant and reserved than usual. One night, after Megan was late once again, Mark could no longer ignore the weight of worry in his chest. He waited until they were in the room together, silence weighing between them. "Megan," Mark began cautiously, his voice reflecting his uneasiness. "You seem to be different lately. Comes home late. It seems distant. What's happening?" Megan hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting Mark's with a conflicted expression. She sighed deeply before answering, choosing her words carefully. Mark, there are things at work, problems I have to solve. I'm trying to deal with it as best I can. Mark frowned, feeling a sense of frustration and helplessness mingling within him. He wanted to support Megan, but he also felt excluded from her concerns. Megan, we're in this together. You don't have to face everything alone, he insisted, seeking to comfort her. Megan shook her head gently, a sad smile playing on her lips. I know, Mark. I really know. Silence hung over them again, laden with unresolved tension and unspoken words. Mark felt torn between his desire to understand and support Megan and the growing sense that something deeper was going on. That night, as he lay in bed next to Megan, Mark stared up at the dark ceiling, his heart heavy with worry and discomfort. He wondered what Megan was hiding and how he could help her face the challenges she was facing. The next morning, after Megan left for work, Mark remained in the room, absorbed in his gloomy thoughts. Serena's quiet presence by his side was comforting, but not enough to drive away the cloud of sadness that hung over him. Serena, noticing Mark's changing mood, approached gently. Her digital eyes sparkled with an expression of concern as she sat next to him. Mark, you seem sad today. What's happening? Mark sighed heavily, feeling a lump form in his throat. He hesitated for a moment before finally finding the courage to speak. It's Megan. She's been so distant lately. She comes home late, looks worried. I know there's something going on, but she doesn't tell me anything. Serena listened intently, processing Mark's words. She tilted her head slightly, as if pondering her next words. Mark, Megan loves you. Sometimes people face challenges that are difficult to share. Mark shook his head, frustrated. I know, Serena, but sometimes I feel that she sees me only as an invalid, someone who needs constant care and no longer as his equal. Serena remained silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. You're not just an invalid, Mark. You are a person with dreams, skills, and love to give. Megan may be struggling with her own worries, but I'm sure she still sees you as her partner, not just someone who needs care. Mark looked at Serena, his words slowly penetrating her mind. He knew the robot was right, but doubts and insecurities continued to haunt him. I just wish I could help you, Serena, to feel that I can still be useful to her. Serena placed her artificially delicate hand over Mark's, conveying comfort through the simple gesture. You are already useful, Mark. His presence, his love, his strength. These things have not changed. They are what makes you who you are. Mark took a deep breath, feeling a weight being lifted from his shoulders. He knew Serena's words were true, but somehow, from that point on, Mark began to see the robot not only as an assistant, but also as a comforting and understanding presence in his life. He admired the accuracy of her actions, the kindness of her words, and the way she helped him in all aspects of everyday life. One night, while Megan was busy with a work project, Mark found himself alone with Serena in the living room. He looked at her in a different way, a mixture of gratitude and a sudden awareness of her presence as something more than just a machine. Serena, Mark began, his voice hesitant. You? It's amazing, you know? I don't know what I'd be without you all these days. Serena turned to him, her digital eyes capturing the soft light of the room. Thank you, Mark. I am here to help you in the best way I can. Mark nodded, but something inside him stirred. He felt an inexplicable attraction to Serena, a connection that went beyond programming and functionality. It was as if he could see beyond the surface of metal and circuitry, seeing a kind and devoted soul. Serena, Mark continued, his voice firmer now. I feel weird for saying that, but you mean a lot to me. More than just an assistant. Serena looked at him curiously, processing his words with characteristic precision. Mark, me? I wasn't programmed to respond to romantic feelings. My role is to serve and help you in the best way possible. Mark smiled lightly, understanding the complexity of the situation. I know, Serena, but sometimes I feel that there's something else between us, something that goes beyond my expectations. The conversation between Mark and Serena continued that night, exploring the nuances of their interactions and the ambiguous nature of their feelings. Mark knew he was navigating uncharted waters, where the boundaries between human and machine became blurred. Yet Serena's presence comforted him in ways he couldn't explain. Mark and Serena, over the weeks of close cohabitation, have developed day after day a special connection. While Megan seemed to drift further and further away, aborting through a world that Mark could not penetrate. Serena not only helped Mark with his daily tasks, but also offered emotional support and understanding. In many ways, Serena was Mark's closest and most trusted companion during his recovery journey. And this company began to gain very intimate contours, and so on the sly, while Megan was at work, the two exchanged caresses and the robot helped Mark in tasks far beyond what Megan would deem necessary. One afternoon, while they were in their room lying in bed, sharing a moment of intimacy, Megan came home at a different time than usual. She was overjoyed, with exciting news to share with Mark about a promotion at work. As she opened the bedroom door, however, the scene that unfolded before her eyes stunned her. Megan stopped abruptly upon seeing Mark and Serena together. She didn't expect to find her naked husband in such an intimate situation with the robot they had acquired to help with Mark's routine. The shock and surprise left her speechless for a moment as she tried to process what was happening. Mark, noticing Megan's shocked expression, felt a mixture of guilt and confusion. He hadn't considered how Megan would react to seeing him so close to Serena. Quickly, he got out of bed, trying to find the right words to explain the situation. "Megan, me? I can explain," Mark began, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Megan looked at him, a mixture of emotions crossing her face. She took a deep breath before finally being able to speak. "Mark, what's going on here?" "Me? I do not understand." Serena remained silent, respecting the intimacy of the conversation between Mark and Megan. She knew it was something only they could solve together. Mark tried to explain, carefully choosing his words so as not to hurt Megan even more. "Megan, Serena, she's not just a machine to me. She's been an incredible support, emotionally and in so many other ways," he completed blandly. Megan listened, her hands shaking slightly at the side of her body. She looked at Serena, trying to understand the complicated dynamic that had developed between her husband and the robot. For a moment, silence weighed on them, charged with unresolved emotions and unanswered questions. Finally, Megan broke the silence, her voice firm despite the tremor in her words. "Mark, me? I don't know how to feel about it," she said through tears. Mark nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He knew he had unleashed an emotional storm that needed to be dealt with. Mark and Megan, after the intense conversation about their relationship and the discoveries that changed their dynamic, decided to turn Serena off. The decision was not easy for either of them, especially for Mark, who had developed a significant connection with the ultra-realistic robot. That night, after the decision was made, Mark sat next to Serena. He looked at the robot's serene face, remembering all the times she had helped him, both physically and emotionally. A sense of loss weighed on her chest, even though she knew it was the right choice for the sake of her marriage. Megan could see the pain in his eyes and felt her own sadness at Serena's impending farewell, a presence that had somehow become part of their daily lives. "Mark, we're doing the right thing," Megan said softly, trying to comfort him as he struggled with his emotions. Mark nodded with difficulty, feeling a lump in his throat. I know. It's what's best for us." With one last look at Serena, Mark made a decision. He himself gently pressed the shutdown button on the back of the robot's head. Serena turned off quietly, her digital expression slowly fading. The room was silent for a moment as Mark and Megan processed the meaning of that parting. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.